Brian. You know, I remember reading in the book of Revelation, God would be speaking to the churches, and He'd say, I like this, and I like this, and I like this, and I like this, but I have this against you. Brian, I like Fusion, I like your heart, I like your family, I like your state, but I have this against you. You're making me drive a truck with a Packer flag on the back. Seriously, it is great to be here. I have been looking forward to this since Brian gave me the invitation, some time ago. I guess it was probably several months ago, and so it's great to be here. It's awesome to be in Oregon. I have my mom's family is from Oregon. In fact, one of my aunt and uncles attend this church here, and I'll get a chance to see them tonight. I haven't seen them in probably 10 plus years, so it'll be pretty cool. Also, I learned after getting booked here and finding out where we were, that my youth pastor from when I was in junior high is actually on staff at this church. He's not here right now, but Scott Wahlberg was my junior high youth pastor, which is pretty cool to know that we're almost getting to see each other again. I think he's in some country that ends with Stan at the end, Kyrgyzstan or Kyrgyzstan or whatever it is. But so it's great to be out here, and I've met some of the great people, and looking forward to connecting with more of you as the days go on. Well, I'm going to begin with just kind of helping everybody to understand a little bit about me. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Why did Brian have me come out here? You know, my name is Mark Entzminger. Everybody say Entzminger. Try growing up with a name that sounds like a sneeze. You know, it doesn't work well. And recently I've had more people mispronouncing my last name. So I thought I'd just immediately let you off the hook that if you just call me Mark, if you never try my last name, it's all right. But here are some of the good ones, the fun ones, the way that people say my name. Entzwissel. The other day I was called Steve Entzwissel. So that's not quite entirely correct. I had Handspringer. Mark Handspringer. I have no idea where they got that one from. I've also been known as Ants Migraine. Had a friend in high school that just called me Ants Migraine. So yay for me on that one. And then finally I had one just recently I was Mint Singer. Mark Entzminger. So you can just call me Mark, no worries there. But sometimes people also ask the question of how did you get to where you are? Tell me a little bit about your story. Well, I've been married 16 years. My wife's name is Christy. She's the lady in the picture. And we have just had an incredible life and ministry together. We've both taken up running or jogging in the last few years. In 2010, at our summer camp, she was going to get the nurse to help a child and ended up twisting her knee, tearing her ACL and her meniscus, and so she went through some reconstructive surgery, went through the physical therapy, and is now actually running faster than I am. And so I say that she has a bionic knee, that the doctors did something to really help her outrun me, and I'm okay with that. We have two boys. Our oldest boy's name is Colby, and Colby is 10 years old. He has a lot of fun. He's in 4th grade. He's actually a black belt in Taekwondo, so he can beat me up. My wife can outrun me. I only have one child that I'm able to defeat in anything. So, but he loves missions. A couple years ago, he gave $2,000 to BGMC, and he set a goal because he really wanted to make a difference. And so he loves missions. I believe God's got great things in store for him. My youngest boy's name is Caden. Caden is 5 years old, and he loves to do everything that his brother does. And he started doing this crazy thing. He's always been, just fun and different. He kind of does things his own way. He came into the world about 8 weeks early, which created a little bit of chaos the day after we got home from 4 weeks of summer camp. And so he came early. He crawled differently. He's growing at a different pace, and so everything's. But recently, he just started doing this thing where he kind of gallops through the house. He doesn't run through the house. He gets down to all four, and if you didn't know it was him, you would think that there was a horse running through the house. And he just runs around the house that way, and he just has so much energy all the time. So he's a great kid. I love my boys. Well, We've been in ministry now about 16 years, and so how did we get to the place that where we are? What was our journey like? And let me just back up a little bit, tell you a little bit about my history so you know who I am. We started ministry at Rapid City, South Dakota. Love the West. That's a picture of me with hair. I don't know how old I was, probably about 24 years old at that time. So it's just a few years ago, back when I had hair, and we were youth pastoring. We started off in youth ministry, doing just youth ministry. And I remember the story last night where he said he went to the interview in a suit and tie. Well, we'd graduated from Central Bible College, very conservative school, and we wore hard-soled shoes and collared shirts to school or to class every day. And so I went to my interview, and I was wearing a suit and a tie, and my wife was in a dress, and we met with this pastor, and he came in, and he was in jeans and a sweatshirt, and his wife was in a running, outfit and kind of a sweatsuit, and I'm like, I am way overdressed, but this is totally my pastor right here. We talked about hunting, and we talked about great things, and just had a blast together. And so we spent 6.5 years in youth ministry. That grew into leading worship and leading choir and helping out with children's ministries. Our first son was born during that time. My pastor became the superintendent of the state of South Dakota, and after a DYD transition, he invited us to come and be the district youth and Christian education directors for the state of South Dakota. So the best way to describe that is I was the Brian Eno of South Dakota, but he does it much better, and I did it with less hair. So we had a great time in 8 years. This is a picture of me on one of my favorite parts of being a district youth director, was leading missions trips to El Salvador, and we had just a blast doing that. And one of the things that I've learned is that when you earnestly give yourself to whatever it is that you have in front of you, that God begins to bless you and grow you in ways that you never ever imagined. And I believe that God did that during that time because although we had been full-time in youth ministry, God really began to grow in us the passion and desire to reach children in a greater way than ever before. Well, about almost a year ago, we received a phone call from the national office in Springfield, Missouri, and they were doing some restructuring. They began to do some strategizing on how they were reaching children. We began a conversation. They said, I think what God has put inside of you matches where He's wanting us to go as a movement. Would you consider coming down and joining our team and helping to lead the area of children's ministries? And I said, you do realize I've never been a children's pastor, right? And they says, we understand that. And my skill was not to come in and tell children's pastors how to do children's ministry, but how to strategize in a way that we can lead into the future and help to raise the bar. I believe across the board in youth ministries and children's ministries, this is a generalization, and there might be exceptions. There are exceptions, I know. But I think sometimes we shoot far too low of what our standard of expectation is for youth and children. And one of the things that I hope that we can do is through the new collaborative effort of Girls Ministries, Royal Rangers, BGMC, Children's Ministry, Gospel Publishing House, and children's ministries across the nation, is that we can begin to raise the bar of what we're expecting our kids to do. So that when youth pastors, when you get handed a child, when they transition into your ministry, that bar has been raised and you can build on top of that rather than feeling like you're starting with something where you don't know where they are. And so I'm very excited about what's going on with that and some of those things that are going to be happening in the near future. So now we're working on things like Faith Case, and I did bring a few resources, and you've got catalogs there. I am not a salesman, and if you don't buy anything, I will not be offended. However, I do have a colleague who's up in the Northwest District right now, and he is a salesman, and he's very competitive. I'd love if I could go back and say, man, I sold out of everything. So I brought just a little bit of stuff so I could sell out. So get out there and buy as much as you can so that I can just say, man, I sold out of everything. And I just won't tell him how much stuff I brought. He'll never know. And so if you want, I'd love to be able to resource you with some children's, and we did bring a couple of youth items as well. And they are more discounted than you'd be able to buy them on Gospel Publishing House or the AG Healthy Church website. So just to make you aware of some of those things. So since returning to Springfield, which is where we went to school, where my wife and I met each other, we started volunteering at the church we got married in. And my wife is now on staff in the children's department. She works about 20 hours a week, or that's what she's supposed to work. But she works on Wednesday nights and on Sundays. Every time there's a service, she's working in the children's department. So those of you who are married to someone who's on staff, I identify with you because I get our boys up and ready for church every Sunday morning. And I know what that feels like, to have your spouse going off to church, and here you are wrangling the children to get them into their clothing, clean, hair combed, get them out of the vehicle on time to the local church, and get them into their classrooms to check them in, because I do that by myself on a weekly basis. So I identify with you. Our church has 2 services, and so I attend the first service and then I volunteer in the second. And so for the first time in 16 years of ministry, I really fully now understand what it's like to be a volunteer in church. So those of you who volunteer at your church, I kind of identify with what you go through as well. And I apologize right now for everybody that you work for full-time in the church, because they don't realize how when they say, you know what, I'm going to change this, or when I'm going to send you this note like last minute, what it does to you as a volunteer, because it's not the first thing on your radar. And so I apologize for all the times I've done that, and even though you've never been in there, I'm apologizing officially for all of that, because I volunteer now and I understand a little bit of what that's like. I also know what it's like to really go into a service and sit in church by yourself. You know, you go into church where you want to grow, and one person's volunteering here, your kids are over there, and so you walk into the sanctuary and you sit in a service all by yourself without the people that you love the most. It really gives a different perspective to ministry. And so I identify with a lot of the different areas. I identify with youth pastors. I identify with children's pastors. And because I volunteer, I'm beginning to really understand what it means to be a children's pastor. I was visiting with Amy last night, and I said, hey, what's the greatest thing about children's ministry? She says, the look on the kid's face when you realize they finally get it. And I understand that. When you've got these 8- and 9-year-old kids that for the first time they get it. And you understand what that is in youth ministry too. When maybe everybody's dismissed and there's 1 or 2 kids that just sit and they're talking, and you walk up to them and what are you talking about? And it's like they're talking about your message and they get it. That's a great feeling. And I understand that. So hopefully today, as we dive into leadership and influence, you'll understand that I come and I have a level of understanding of what you face on a regular basis. And so today we're going to get into 8 seconds with influence. 8 seconds with influence is, I don't know about you, but when you hear 8 seconds, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? PBR. Any bull riders here? Anybody who likes to watch rodeos and bull riding, and a couple of people? Well, we used to love going to the stock show and rodeo when we were in youth ministry, and we'd go and we'd walk through and hear the auction off the cows and the bulls and everything. And so today I thought it'd be good if we'd talk about 8 seconds with influence. You know, we're at a leadership retreat. We're going to be talking a lot about what it means to be a leader, how to maximize your influence as a leader. Last night we heard 4 S's of leadership or of influence that are great. John Maxwell says leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. Boil it down plain and simple. Leadership is influence. And I would like to say that the truth of the matter is that we all lead others, or we all influence others. But that happens both when we lead and when we follow. And sometimes we all are striving to become that leader, that one who can have everybody essentially bow before them and say, whatever you say, we're going to make that happen. And we want to be that kind of a leader who's in charge, whether we're full-time. We look at maybe somebody who's at a larger church or a more engaging setting, or maybe we're volunteers and say, well, if they could just bring me on staff, I could do this, this, and this, and this. And we're striving to be leaders, and the person who's in charge, and there are scads and scads of books that are written on how to develop yourself as a leader, how to become a stronger leader, because that equates to greater level of influence. Well, I would like to propose to you today that although that is great, and we'll get into that in some later sessions, that we really can't truly maximize our influence as a leader until we understand our influence as a follower. And so today we're going to look at what that means, and before we get into it, to not disappoint, we want to make sure we talk a little bit about bull riding. So bull riding, the thing that I think makes bull riding interesting is it's one of the shortest sports known to mankind. 8 seconds is all you get. The maximum that you get. You don't score anything beyond 8 seconds, and if you fall short of 8 seconds, you get a no score. And so 8 seconds is all you have. Clearly the rider is not in control of the situation, but he's the one who gets the score. He only gets a score if he stays on for 8 seconds, and he gets additional scores like for style points or for spurring on the bull to spin and to do these different things. He gets disqualified for touching the bull. The bull cannot be controlled, but the rider needs to control himself in order to get points. Do you see some leadership principles here in comparison? There may be a severe oversimplification, but the rider who learns to keep his actions and reactions in step with the unpredictable movements of the bull will be successful in completing the 8-second ride, and thereby will receive a score. Successful bull riders keep their balance regardless of what the bull does. You see some principles here that as we determine to become second, that our role is to watch our actions and reactions to those that we follow, that we are to remain in balance as we exhibit levels of influence. Probably the greatest bull of all time was born and raised in North Dakota. His name was Little Yellow Jacket. He made his debut in the PBR in 1999. His average buck-off time was 2.66 seconds. He weighed in at 1,800 pounds, which is about 300 pounds more than the average bull would weigh. He won Bull of the Year 3 years in a row, which has never, ever been done before. In fact, no other bull has received the Bull of the Year 2 years in a row. 3 years in a row, he got it. Only in 6 years of being in the PBR, only 14 riders ever stayed on for 8 seconds. That's a pretty good bull. Now, I don't know, and I'm not insinuating that your pastor or your board is like the bull. Only you can make that determination. I'm not asking how many of your pastors have bucked off youth pastors and children's pastors in 6 years of being in the pro pastoring association. But I do think there are some comparisons that we can draw here. And so if it doesn't offend people too badly, I wonder if we can learn some leadership lessons at looking at the relationship between the bull and the rider. Is Little Yellow Jacket the John Maxwell of bull riding? Where in our look today we see that because the bull is the one who's in control and the rider is the one who gets the points, that we are to determine to be the rider, that we are the one who looks and watches what the leader is doing and watches their movements, and it is our goal as being the one who is second or third or fourth, that we are to stay in sync with what our leader is doing. You know, in the path of becoming a great leader, I think we need to understand what it means to become second. All too often, we strive to be the one in control. We try to be the bull or the leader. How can I control the people around me? How can I maneuver in such a way that it's my vision and it's my dream that get realized? It's my position and place to lead those who aren't with me, but they're in my way, and so I want to try to maneuver around them. It's important and much has been written on it, but what about being second? You know, the saying is true that unless you are the lead dog, the view never changes. However, I do think that there's a lot to be learned by being second. At times we feel like people have come in the way of accomplishing what God has called us to do. It seems that we are down on the organizational chart, and when it comes to calendar, budgeting, and staffing, I understand that. When you've got this great vision for this event that you want to pull off, and you go and you meet and you started things in motion and you've done all this stuff, and your pastor says, you know what, let's get together with everybody on the calendar, and all of a sudden you realize that women's ministries or men's ministries or senior adult ministries or whatever, they had gotten in just maybe days or months before you because they knew to call and get it on the church calendar, and now there's nothing you can do. And you're like, well, how can I do? This is my vision. This is my chance to reach kids. Don't you understand? And we feel like we are so far down on the organizational chart, and our vision is so great that we just say, you know what? I'd love it if I could just be right up here, that I could start calling the shots. If budgets and calendars and staffing were just be more under my control, think of all the people that we could reach. We have a God-sized vision and a dream, and feel that because of that vision that we should have a greater voice into these elements. But the reality is that when we learn how to get our actions and reactions into sync with our leader, When we keep things in balance and perspective, it often provides the influence required to do greater and more amazing things than we ever imagined. You know, our society today is very me-focused. You take a look at social networking giant Facebook, and you take a look at the millions and millions of channels of information, from friend requests to events to ads, and everything is customized to you. You are the center of your Facebook. You don't get necessarily things that you don't want unless you've clicked on it one or two times and now it comes to you. In fact, Facebook has such incredible algorithms that they know exactly, they probably are more aware of who you are than you're aware of who you are, because of your interaction on Facebook. Netflix would be the same way. If you've ever signed up for a Netflix account, you know that you go through and you have to fill out a survey on how you would rank different movies. And then they customize to you the information about movies that they believe is you. And so Facebook and Netflix and Pandora and all these other social and online things actually are a digital representation, or maybe they are the virtual you. And so we can begin to feel like, well, look, everywhere else the universe revolves around me. Facebook customizes to me. Netflix customizes to me. Why can't the church do the same thing? Why can't they understand what I need? And why can't they understand how great of a vision God has given me and how great of a talent God has given me? Why can't the church do the same thing? And I think we're missing the point of what it means to really truly serve. Because it's not about us, but it's about somebody else. You know, and whether you are paid or whether you're a volunteer, we often think about, well, when will I get my chance? Or when will somebody finally open the door for me? But I think it's important that we look at some individuals in the Bible who got their chance to influence when they put their all into being second. They served and were loyal in the most difficult of circumstances. Many of them put their dream on hold. Some of them even felt like their dream had gone in the garbage. But they decided that they would become second and serve the leader. The Bible is not lacking in stories of these individuals. So today, we're going to look at 8 seconds of influence, or 8 people who were positioned second or below when they gained the influence to make a difference. The first one is Joseph. We all know that Joseph had a leadership dream that God had given to him, and as a result, he got hated by his brothers, and so he was sold as a slave. But through excellence that he had in serving, he drew the attention of Potiphar and quickly rose to second in command. He didn't want to be there. He was sold against his will, but essentially, this would be the first, maybe one of the first recorded times of human trafficking in the Old Testament. But he rose to a position of second in command. After a false accusation, he was thrown into prison. But yet, even in prison, he served well. It wasn't about pity parties and poor me. And after some key interpreting dreams again, he was forgotten. Selflessly, he interpreted now Pharaoh's dream and gave advice on how to manage the pending food crisis, which resulted in putting him in charge of a multi-year relief effort that spanned several countries. And this happened by the time he was 30 years old. Here's the important part of this. Joseph did not quit just because being second didn't seem to work. He was second in his home, and his brothers hated him because his father preferred him. He was second in Potiphar's house, and things were going well until his wife lied and got him thrown in prison. He was second in prison, but yet he still didn't have those pity parties. He was even then second. In fact, I don't know that he ever became greater than being second. But look at the influence that he was given, even though he was second. Our next person we'll look at is Joshua. Joshua was also second. Moses had commissioned him as one of the 12 to go inspect the land of Canaan. And when he came back, he gave the positive report. He says, yes, there are giants in the land, but our God is bigger, and we can go and we can take this land. And although Moses was the leader at the time, and we don't have a record of whether Moses was really saying, let there be light or not, We don't have a record of whether Moses was in favor of taking the land or not, but the outcry of the people. And so what Joshua had found in being second or lower wasn't listened to. And so now as a result, even though he was in favor of doing and taking the land because he knew that God was with him, he's now relegated to wandering for 40 years in the desert. And during that time, we have no record of insubordination or uprising. He was right. And now for 40 years, he's wandering the desert, eating manna. But yeah, he stayed loyal and faithful to Moses. God saw fit that he should be the one to lead the people into the promised land. I find it interesting that Moses had his sights on that promised land for over 40 years. He made the decisions, called the shots, mediated between God and the grumblers. But then God instructs Moses and says, I need you to publicly tell people that Joshua is the person who will lead them. And so Moses gets up after those 40 years and he says to the people, Joshua is going to be your leader. Joshua was right. He was the successor, but he remained loyal in second position. How many times in our churches do we feel so right about what we've got to do, but sometimes leadership will say we need to go a different direction, and we end up throwing them under the bus. We end up grumbling and complaining. We say, I cannot serve a pastor who doesn't trust in me. We have an example right here of a man who assisted for 40 years when he was right. And God used him mightily after that. We have our third one, and it's our first lady that we'll be looking at today. It's our only lady today. Ruth was also second. Ruth's husband had died. She had no kids, no father-in-law. She was living with a widow, so that meant no income. Ruth followed the poor widow woman to... Poor widow woman. I don't know if it sounded funny to you the first time when I said it or not, but it did to me. So, Ruth followed the poor widowed woman to a new land in order to serve and remain second. She worked in the fields to provide, where Boaz ultimately redeemed her. And you say, well, where is the influence in Ruth? If she had never done that, if she'd never served Boaz or served Ruth and gone and worked for Boaz, we wouldn't have the lineage that led to King David. You know what's interesting here is sometimes we will never fully understand the impact of our influence in this lifetime. Because as a result of Ruth and Boaz, we had a King David. And as a result of King David, we had a Messiah. You see, it was not popular to go live with somebody who was widowed. To go in a place where there was really not much work, and they were living in a place where there was kind of a famine, and they moved where they did because there was supposed to be food there. And so she went and she would just pick up the pieces and the scraps, and that's what they would do. There's not a lot of glory in being second. And how many times in our churches do we stop short of our level of influence when it comes to doing things like setting up and tearing down and doing things where there doesn't seem to be a lot of glory, and say, well, can't you understand? I remember I used to get so frustrated because we would do these outreaches and we'd use the gymnasium, and we had a custodian who would come in, and his job was on Saturday night. He was supposed to make sure everything was clean. And so if we did something late on Friday and then on Saturday, he'd get all bent out of shape, because how am I supposed to get it cleaned up? Because we would take our gymnasium and we'd reset it for Sunday morning service. And so you'd have this great, incredible outreach, and you'd have a lot of fun. You'd have kids coming in, and they get saved, and then on Monday morning, it's like, you get the memo where the custodian stops by, and he's just angry as all get out. I mean, because you changed his schedule for the weekend, and now he couldn't do this. And you start thinking, man, we just had people get saved, and now you're reaming me out because we didn't put the chairs in the right order. And you can begin to feel like it's not even worth it to go through all this hard work. But through this relationship and through the influence, you can begin to realize, say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make that happen. What can we do to make it better next time? And rather than getting all upset and uptight about these things, we take the position of Ruth and say, even though there's no glory, and even though we don't understand our level of influence completely, let's take and let's continue to serve. And let's serve another person. Let's serve the custodian in addition to serving the students. of our community. Samuel was also second. Samuel was dropped off at the temple when he was young to really be raised by a not so qualified priest or parent. He did a good job, but I don't know that we would say that he was the model parent because of what his sons were allowed to do and what they were allowed to do in the temple and during times of worship. But had Samuel not been raised in that temple and been second to Eli, he would have never learned the most important lesson of his life, and that was how to hear God's voice. By being second and by staying there, even though it was not ideal for a child to be in that environment, and really, I think maybe that picture of a father is what resulted in him and having his own sons not stay really true to the faith. Being in there, he learned to hear the voice of God, and it's the same voice that instructed him to listen to the people and give him a king. It's the same voice that said, pick Saul. It's the same voice that said, are you going to keep mourning for Saul, or will you go and pick another one? It's the same voice that passed by all the first 7 sons of Jesse and said, where's David? He's missing. It's that voice that he learned by serving second in a place that was not ideal. And see, when we're second, we gain a level of influence because we grow spiritually and we can learn about God and service in a greater way. Even though that leader may not have been the most effective, he continued to serve in that position of second, and he served loyally. We have another one here, Elisha. Elisha was also second, and he was brought on board by Elijah after a bout of post-sacrifice depression, where he had been up on Mount Carmel and they had done the big battle with the prophets of Baal, and he goes and hides and he feels like, I'm the only one. And after all of that, God says, I want you to go find a partner. I want you to go find somebody. So he's dealing with somebody, and Elisha is dealing with a leader who really maybe has some self-confidence issues, who maybe has issues of depression, who maybe has issues that we're really not aware of, but it certainly wasn't what we would appear to be a John Maxwell or an Andy Stanley kind of a leader. Although he had done some great things, he really had some personal issues, and that's who Elisha was serving under. So he followed him and he began to assist Elijah. Because of Elisha's assistance, Elijah continued to be effective. And yet, because Elisha never wavered from being by his side, he received the double portion. You see, Elijah had even waved Elisha off at the end of the day. He said, you know what, stop following me, stop following me. But Elisha, I believe, understood that Elijah still needed that encouragement. He still needed somebody to be with him. He says, I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm not going to waver from you. And I want to be there when you go, because I want to receive a double portion. Now, you talk about influence. To say to a great man or a woman of God and say, you know what, I'm going to be your second. And I'm going to serve you, and I'm going to be loyal to you in hopes that one day I will receive a double portion. Let me pause just for a second here and say this. That in all humility and right spirit and attitude, I hope none of us ever look at great men and women of God, and I know you do because we're trying to honor them, and say, man, I hope that in my ministry I can do half of what you've done. I don't think God wants us to be half. I mean, what if there was 100 and we said, I want to be half, and somebody looks at us and says, man, you're a 50, I hope I can be half, and now we're a 25, and somebody says, man, you're a 25, that's awesome, I hope I can be half of that. And I know we're trying to pay honor, but I think it makes more sense in all humility and loyalty to the call of God on your life and His presence in your life, that we look at men and women of God and say, as God would empower me, I pray that He would take and He would build on what you've done, and that God would give me a double portion of that Spirit. But it doesn't happen until we've learned how to become second. Nehemiah was second. He was taken captive and he was made to serve in the king's court. Over the years as a servant, he rose to the distinguished role of cupbearer. You know, I think, well, that sounds kind of silly, and actually it was, I think, a pretty big honor to be able to be in the king's presence as an outsider, to be trusted to bring the cup in even when there were maybe matters of state that were being discussed. He was trusted. But that service to the king paved the way for him to extend a vacation and safe passage in order to lead a very aggressive construction project. Though Nehemiah was only a cupbearer, he is regarded as one of the greatest leaders because of the influence he showed on the king and the people in rebuilding the wall. Here's the important part. Nehemiah, because of serving second, he was able to go and humbly ask, simply make a request for permission. He didn't throw tantrums. He didn't throw fits. In fact, it says he washed his face to try to hide that he'd been praying and weeping. But the king noticed something was wrong. I don't think that would have happened if he hadn't been second. And look at the influence that he had. Simply making a request of the king granted him permission to go, granted him safe passage to go. That happened because he was second. Daniel was second. Again, taken captive from Judah. He served under Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. He also served during King Darius' reign, where he was positioned as one of the presidents, so the king would not suffer loss from the 120 satraps. It says that he had an excellent spirit, and that was the reason that the other people wanted to take him down and ended up with the lion's den situation. Because of his spirit and no fault, he experienced the lion's den, but possibly of more significance is we have visions about the end times. Here's the interesting thing about Daniel. He served under 3 different leaders. He was able to adjust and thrive under all of them because he kept balance at being second. Truly great bull riders are those who can get on different bulls in different settings and stay on. And people who are truly leaders and influencers in second can support people, multiple people, at the same time. Daniel served under 3 different kings and kept his balance. Well, if you've been keeping count, you know that we've reached number 7, and so our 8th second looks a lot like the picture you signed when you got to Facebook for the very first time. Who's number 8? Who's the 8th second of influence? There's so many of them in the Bible. You've got disciples. You've got Timothy. You've got lots of people who were second. David was second. There's so many that we could go to, but I'm going to ask, is the 8th second in this room? Is the 8th second with influence in this room? You know, regardless of how high you climb in your church, and climb's not the best word to use, but where you are in the organizational chart, whether you're lead pastor, staff pastor, you're always still serving somebody. You never get to the point where you call all the shots. If you are, I wouldn't want to serve you. Because we need to be understanding that we all serve somebody. We're all second, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a board, whether it's a parent, whether it's a child. We have got to serve those people. Will you be the 8th second? Who will you be serving? How can you keep balance when the leader pursues God's plan and it seems like it conflicts with yours? What would it look like if everyone in the room focused on being second? I'm going to close with a very brief story. Early in my youth ministry, a pastor's daughter was dating a kid who was new to the faith. And he had come in and during his lunch break, and he said, "Mark, I need to meet with you." And he was a great singer, incredible voice. And he comes in and says, I've got a problem. I said, "What's the problem?" He said, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, you're dating the pastor's daughter. You're coming in to confess to the youth pastor. What is your problem? You're like, please, don't let it be something really, really bad. And he was crying and he was weeping. He said, "I believe God's calling me into ministry." He says, "I really think God wants me to do something in missions, in ministry." I said, "That's awesome. What's the problem?" So the problem is, my mom and dad want me to go to this university in Wyoming to get an education in music and vocal performance. He says, and I believe that God has spoken to me, but my parents so desperately want me to go to this school. If you understand being second,
and you understand how God works, there's no conflict there. Because God said very specifically in His Word, children, obey your parents. And I was able to say to that boy, I can't say how this is going to pan out. Because I can't say that you didn't hear God. I believe you did. But I do know that God said to honor your parents, to obey your parents. It wasn't really what he wanted to hear, but he went with it, thankfully. So he graduated that year, and he went 1 year to the school. His parents paid for it. But they saw the change in him from before he was saved until after he was saved. And as a result of him obeying them, they said, you know what? I believe that you've done what we've asked you to do. We're going to continue to support you as you pursue God's call in your life. He went to a master's commission for a couple of years, got connected with a church organization, and now is back getting his master's degree in music education and performance because he spent several years over in Malaysia doing missions work. And now he's going back to Cambodia to teach music in the school system as a missionary. And get this, he's doing it all with the support and endorsement of mom and dad. Think of the influence that would have been lost if we determined to tell the people around us that, you know what, you don't need to be second. This is a chance for you to move up. They're against you. They don't believe in you. It's time that you become first. There's a time for us to be first and call the shots, but it only comes after we've learned how to be second. I'd like to pray for you. Would you bow your heads? Father, thank you so much for the seconds in the Bible. And Lord, like John the Baptist said, I need to decrease so that you can increase. Father, I pray that as we strive to be incredible leaders, incredible influencers, that we would not do so at the expense of what it means to be second. Father, help us to have a posture that says, I will serve other people and I will help them to be successful. In Jesus' name, amen. Before Brian, he's right here. Can I say two things? One thing? I don't know how many things. Just two sounded good. Some of you, when you get home, and maybe even before that, you might need to apologize to a leader because you've not been the right kind of second. And I hope you'll have the guts to do that. Others of you, you've been okay with that, but you've really not been endorsing the vision and the leadership of those around you. And it might go beyond your senior pastor, your lead pastor, if you have multiple staff, depending on where you are in the flow chart. But I'd also like to say to this man right here, although he doesn't dictate what you do, God has put a mantle of leadership on him. And you think about an army going out to take a field or a hill. And if every battalion did their own thing, you'd never succeed. But when you have a leader who casts a vision and paints a picture, and the battalions understand that, you know what, if I get in line with the vision and the direction, think of what we could do together. You heard last night him talk about his desire to resource through Speed the Light. Let me just challenge you, youth pastors, make Speed the Light a priority, because it's a priority for this man right here. Think of what you can do for your missionaries by following his leadership and vision. But Speed the Light is more. If all you do is provide for missionaries, you don't need teenagers to do that. I'll just tell you right now, teenagers don't need to provide for the missionaries. We could find another avenue for that. But why Speed the Light is important for you, youth pastors, is this. Because your teenagers need to know about God's economy. They need to know about sowing and reaping. They need to know about compassion. They need to have the first car that they ever buy be one they give away. And that will not happen if we allow this opportunity to get behind the vision of this leader right here and become second and say, you know what, all these other things are great, but we want to get behind the vision of our leader right here. Thanks.